everybody. This is Hillary with WaterLogged. I am so excited for today's interview. Today, we're going to talk to Karen from Monterey Bay Aquarium. How's it going today, Karen?
Hi, I'm doing well. I'm the water science manager at the Monterey Bay Aquarium. My role is to run the laboratory that does a series of different kinds of tests on the water throughout the aquarium and on our intake. And we have water quality testing. It's basically our water chemistry tests. We do microbiology testing as well. And I also oversee the inline and handheld sensors that run a lot of the important data throughout the aquarium for things like pH and dissolved oxygen and a few other cool sounding acronyms.
Hey, so I'm very excited. Like, I don't know about you guys that are watching. If you have home aquariums, I think you're going to find this a very interesting interview and conversation because, for everybody that does have tanks at home or has taken care of tanks, it is always fascinating to hear how some of this stuff is done on such a larger scale and, how water quality is managed and maintained, especially with an aquarium like Monterey Bay, because the aquarium itself sits right on the water. So for people who haven't been there or who aren't familiar with it, could you kind of tell us a little bit about how the aquarium is set up and like where it's located?
Yeah. So the Monterey Bay Aquarium is located in a marine protected area. It's an area of biological significance because, in part, we have this deep submarine canyon. It's the deepest submarine canyon on the west coast of the United States. It's about 12,000 feet deep, which is often you see this image of the Grand Canyon next to the Monterey Bay Canyon, and they're about just as deep. So if you've ever been to the Grand Canyon National Park and looked down and thought that's pretty far, that's about what our submarine canyon is like as far as depth goes. Yeah.
I didn't realize, like, I knew that you were situated like on a canyon, but I didn't realize that it was that deep.
Yeah, it's super deep, and it's really cool because we get access to studying a lot of those animals that live in the deep canyon. We have a sister organization, Mola, which is our the research organization that studies the submarine canyon. And we often partner with them to be able to study and collect animals from the deep sea, which is really, really cool.
I'm going to interrupt you. On a side note, if you guys logged on Instagram or Facebook, go check it out because I'm always resharing their images. Probably one of like my favorite pages to watch because I learned something new.
Yeah. So because we're on the submarine canyon, we get some really interesting water conditions. Well, let me step back a second. So when you visit the aquarium, we have these beautiful decks that overlook the bay. The bay is just gorgeous. And, you can see sometimes whales or dolphins swimming by. Definitely you see sea otters playing around in the kelp most days, which is adorable to go out and watch. So we're really connected to our bay. The water from the bay comes and flows into our systems. We have what we call a semi-open and semi-closed portion of the aquarium, which I'll talk about probably more later. But the water comes in, and we get what's basically out there in the water. We have we see these events that are called upwelling events that are when the deep sea water is brought up to more towards the surface. And so when we get some of that deep sea water, that can cause some interesting water quality concerns and changes that we have to adjust to. But it's really interesting. That position really just ties us to the bay, what's happening out there, we see happening in our systems. And it's a different challenge than working in a closed aquarium. It's fun to see the two different worlds.
That sounds really cool.
Yeah, it is cool.
I've only been to your aquarium once, and I remember like sitting out. I did see like on the open areas, like I remember seeing like a whale and a whole bunch of sea otters. And there is this tank. I'm going to try and post a picture of it in this video. I feel like as the waves came in, like you could watch the waves come in, and then you could almost like see the waves crashing over top of the tank. Is it?
Yeah, so that's what we call our wave crash tank. It does have, it kind of will have a whole bunch of water build up and then crash over. And that's cool because it's out on our deck. It feels very natural because you're out looking at the ocean, and then you turn and you go, oh, what was that water crashing over there? Oh, and it's got a little, tide pool kind of animals that really enjoy that crashing wave action. It's a really cool exhibit.
I spent probably the most of my time when I visited. Just, wow, this is so cool how it's set up.
Well, and that's when you know you're a true aquarium nerd, when you're trying to figure out how things are set up. How do they do this really neat trick? Yep. There's a lot of that at the Monterey Bay Aquarium. We have some systems where the fish just look like they're always swimming, and you go, oh gosh, how far back does that tank go? What is the shape of it? How do we just constantly see these mackerel swimming? And then you work there, you see the magic behind the scenes. You go, oh, okay, now that makes sense. That's really cool how we create those illusions. But there's a lot of that even just with our jelly exhibits too. You can't see the edges. You can't see how those windows into the magic jellies work, but you look on the behind the scenes, and it's a lot of engineering that goes into it. It's really cool.
It's incredible the amount of like thought process that goes into creating some of these systems to make these beautiful visuals that you could just sit and stare at them all day. I think I don't know what it's called, the open ocean tank. I feel like it's one of the first ones that I saw when I came in, and it's just wow, it's incredible. It makes you just feel so small, and you realize that wow, this system is just like one tiny little example, and there's a huge ocean out there that just like, all right.
Yeah, I love that about the open ocean tank system. Is just you go in there, and you can't really see the back of the exhibit most of the time, and you kind of wonder what's out there. And sometimes different animals will come closer to the window, and you go, oh, there's a Mola in there. Oh, well, what's back there? Oh, that's a scalloped hammerhead. And you kind of, as you wait, you see different animals kind of come forward or not. And, of course, those big tuna are just impressive because they're huge, and you just don't see them other aquariums, which is really cool. The big bait ball of all of the sardines is really cool. Watching them school and kind of moving out of the way for some of the tuna or the sharks as they swim by. I love sitting in front of that exhibit and just staring at all of that and imagining, what's out there in that ocean, right?
You mentioned Mola, so today I've got on little, I don't know if you can see them.
Oh, those are so cute!
That I got from Monterey Bay Aquarium.
Oh, I don't know if they still have those in the gift store, but I'd have to check. I'm like, oh, I want some.
That's a Mola.
So cute, yeah.
If there was a Mola on exhibit when I was there, I don't think I saw it. But ever since, I'm like, I've been on this big kick. I'm like, I really want to see a Mola. Like bucket list items. I want to see a Mola. I want to go diving with them.
Well, shameless plug. You can visit our webcams and look at our open sea exhibit, which we do have a Mola right now. So you can come and check them out. They're so cool.
Okay, so we've talked about how the aquarium uses water, like you just pull it straight out of the bay and use it for the aquariums. And we've touched on that big open ocean tank and some of the other tanks. How much water, like gallon-wise, I don't even know if you know this number, like how many gallons of water are in the aquarium?
At a given time, there's probably about 2 million gallons. I'd have to get the exact number. because that changes. Sometimes we add additional systems and holding tanks in the back, but it kind of depends. I do know that we can pump about 2,000 gallons per minute around the aquarium at a given time. So we kind of recirculate that throughout the aquarium and then discharge it back into the bay. So there's a lot of water. The open ocean tank alone has 1 million gallons, which is more. It's like the whole rest of the aquarium all in one exhibit, which is pretty cool.
That's a lot of water coming in, a lot of water going out, and a lot of water to manage and maintain. How do you guys filter it?
We use high pressure sand filters to pull out particulates and to kind of cause some gas exchange that happens in there. But at night, we don't filter the seawater. At night, we allow raw seawater to go into our exhibits that are on our nearshore wing. That's the wing that has our kelp forest exhibit and a lot of our other native Monterey species on display. And we let that raw seawater come in. It has a whole bunch of different nutrients and phytoplankton that come in and feed a lot of our filter feeders. So we don't always filter our water. So we turn on the filters again when morning comes and guests are coming, because otherwise it looks a little bit soupy. If you've ever been out diving, some days you have really great visibility, maybe if you're somewhere tropical. But if you're somewhere like diving in California, there's days where it can look really quite murky, and that's perfectly natural. That's what we experience out in the ocean. But we would see that as well, and you'd have a hard time seeing the giant sea bass in the kelp forest tank and different animals. Maybe you'd see the Garibaldi because it's bright orange. But we definitely kind of start to filter that water so it looks great for everyone to come and actually see everything.
Obviously, if you're bringing in water, there's a lot, well, maybe not. If it's coming from like the deeper water, it might not have as many pollutants and stuff in it. But what are some of the issues or some of the things that you have to watch for and, kind of be aware of?
Yeah, so being on a submarine canyon, we are pulling in deeper sea water. You're not going to have as much problems with things like pollution and runoff as you would like if you were somewhere kind of pulling more shallow and in a polluted area. Of course, we do pretty well in Monterey, but basically the water at the deep sea is very cold. It has low dissolved oxygen as well, and it also has a lower pH than surface seawater. So if we have some of those upwelling events where we get a lot of deep sea water versus just kind of a little bit of the deep sea water, which is typical, we can have our dissolved oxygen be very low and have some issues with that, where we have to make sure our water is getting that amount of oxygen introduced through different ways that we can kind of accommodate that. But you definitely don't always know what you're getting when you walk in one day. Oh, what do we have going on here today? Of course, we have staff. Our controls team. They're there all night long monitoring. We have sensors that tell us what's coming in. But for me, coming in, what do we have today? It's kind of an interesting way, because things are always changing in the bay. They're changing in the aquarium. And we kind of have to go with the flow, is what I say with the open system. Go with the flow. You kind of accommodate what's happening in nature. And, there's some days where you have to kind of make accommodations. Some days maybe the pH is a little bit lower, but it happens gradually. The animals are used to it. It's part of what they would be in anyway out in the bay. So it's interesting to see some of those changes.
That's very unique. I would not have thought of that, but that's got to be, I don't know, like a fun, challenging said, you don't know what you're going to come into, but you do have to be on top of your game to make sure that, you're responsible for the water that these animals are living in these systems, and making sure that it's what they need.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned that sometimes the pH can be a little bit lower. What define lower, I guess?
So on the incoming water, maybe like it's below 8, more like maybe like sometimes 7.8, which if you say to a reef keeper, they're going to say, "Oh my gosh, that is just so low. How is anything alive?" Because they're always trying to drive up to like 8.3, 8.4 at least. But yeah, so our pH can be on that lower side. Our corals do just fine even when the pH is a little lower. Of course, when we off-gas some of the water and add a little oxygen in, the pH comes back up. And so in our exhibits, it can be a bit higher than that. But also have plenty of calcium coming in with the water. We don't have to dose as much for things like that as you would as a hobbyist reef keeper, where you're constantly wondering just how much strontium to add in order to maximize your corals. We get nature's recipe, which seems to do pretty well with them. But yeah, it's just when I first saw those pH values that we get coming from a closed system aquarium, I was like, oh my goodness, But in our system, everything does well, even with a slightly lower pH than you would keep in a closed system. It's just different, and the problems with a low pH in a closed system typically arise from other water quality issues, not just from that deep sea water. So in our case, a little bit lower pH isn't going to cause any issues.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that. I was having a conversation with somebody the other day, and I was talking about how, these things that we keep in our tanks, they're used to, well, I'm going to say, especially for Monterey Bay, like some of those are local species. They're used to being in the ocean. Like when you look at water chemistry in your tank versus in the ocean's never going to have like all of those perfect values. Like, as aquarists, I feel like a lot of times we're always like chasing numbers to get it to be at that exact, correct pH or alkalinity or whatever. But, about Mother Nature in the ocean, she doesn't go for perfect numbers. She's just like, all right, here's what you got today.
Yeah. Yeah. And, those numbers will change depending on where you are. Are you in beautiful, untouched reef in Palau, or are you in, off the coast of Florida, right by a town? Or, there's so many different places that are going to be totally different. Up on the East Coast, you're going to have slightly different water chemistry than here. So it is kind of funny that we have our set numbers that everyone has determined are the correct values for keeping aquariums at. And you wonder even where do these values come from? Who came up with these?
Yep. As we're filming this right now, Monterey Bay Aquarium is still closed. It's one of the few aquariums in the United States, I believe, that's still closed. Mm-hmm. How's life behind closed doors? Do you guys notice? Do the animals miss the visitors? Like, tell me what it's like.
Well, it took a bit of adjusting at first to have the empty aquarium. At first, it just kind of felt like that magical morning time you have before the aquarium opens to guests, and you can run through and everything's empty, and you can look at all of the exhibits beforehand. And typically our team starts pretty early, so I was used to being in an empty aquarium, and that didn't seem too weird. It started getting weird as the afternoon sun would come out, and you'd realize, oh, well, it's not morning anymore. Where is everyone? So, having that kind of set in was a little bit just sad, because that's the kind of place that needs to be enjoyed by a lot of people, and having it be empty for so long just feels wrong and sad that we have all these beautiful exhibits that people aren't being able to enjoy as and get excited about the ocean and conservation. So definitely, I feel like I'm ready for having people come back. It's been a different situation. There's been some nice aspects, like we have that beautiful outdoor deck, and because we're trying to social distance, and if we need to have discussions with staff who are working, we'll go out and sit on that back deck and have our masks on, and it's a little safer to have a conversation with someone out there, and it's just gorgeous views. Like I said earlier, you can watch the sea otters playing and all these different animals. You never know what's going to go by and what you can watch. So that can be a little bit distracting sometimes during those staff meetings if a whale goes by, but it keeps us all happy. You go, oh, what was that out there? So that's been kind of one of the fun things that has been changed for those of us who are on site still and working, is just kind of being able to spread out into some of those spaces where we wouldn't normally be taking up a lot of space, like that back deck. I try to go around and make rounds and look at the different exhibits as time has gone on. And I think some of the animals, they get excited to see me when I go wandering around, like the penguins, they get very excited, especially the juvenile ones. They're like, oh, what's happening? Let's see what this person is up to. So I think some animals seem to miss some of that extra interaction that they get from guests. But I know our staff has worked really hard to keep all of us entertained, provide enrichment, different toys and things to keep them entertained. So they're not really like bored and missing people because they get that interaction with their keepers. And so there is that. They maybe don't have as much of like the guests kind of playing back through the window. So I think some of the animals, they're fine, they don't miss it. And there's other animals, they just don't interact with people as much anyway. Like a garden eel, for example, they are the types, they like to hide in their little holes in the sand. And, they are a little more of a skittish animal. So not having people around as much, I do notice they when I walk by, it takes them a little longer to kind of come out and see what's going on. So I try to visit them a lot just so they kind of get used to the occasional person walking by. But, when we reopen, we'll reopen with smaller numbers. They'll come back into seeing people, and some of the animals will be very happy to kind of get to play through the window with people again.
Let's jump into water quality testing, right?
Ooh.
Now, you talked a little bit about like home aquariums, and so I feel like you're probably familiar at least a little bit with like some of the basics, and a lot of it is similar stuff, just scaled up on a different version. So how would you say that your life support systems at Monterey Bay differ from, I guess, your average aquarium hobbyist at home?
Well, definitely size for one. We have huge piping that just sprawls throughout the whole aquarium. So you look at the size, and it's pretty massive. The size of like our sand filters, for example, way bigger than you would have on a home aquarium. Maybe you wouldn't even have a sand filter. Obviously, those are all for larger tanks. You'd have some sort of other mechanical filter to catch out particles. Our protein skimmers that we have for our open sea exhibit are huge. I mean, we affectionately have names for them because they're so big and have, their own personalities to us. But, you look at a home reef aquarium tank and they're frothing away, but these things they're beasts in comparison. They're huge. So a lot of it's the size, the scale of those things. But, a lot of the same essential things are basically there, right? You've got your mechanical filtration. We have biofiltration in our exhibits as well, similar like you would have in a home aquarium, although we don't have as high of bio loads as you would have at a closed home aquarium. because of that constant exchange from the bay. Even though some of our tanks recirculate quite a lot, so we do have more in those. But it's similar. All those same elements are there, but just, I guess, bigger and a little bit different because of the semi-open nature of our aquarium.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when it comes to testing, right? Obviously, you guys are a professional facility. Run me through your lab.
Okay.
Like, what kind of tools do you use for water testing?
So, a lot of tools are kind of similar, just, of course, maybe a little bit bigger and a little more high tech than what you would use at home. We don't use drop kits, which I use at home too, so don't feel too bad about that on my tank. But we use equipment like one of our big workhorses is our UV spectrophotometer, which is not all that different in principle than like a colorimeter. Kind of similar in the way it works, as far as you add reagents to your water sample that change a color, and that color is proportional to whatever that analyte you're looking for. So like nitrite, the pinker it turns, the more nitrite you have. That same idea is what we see on our tests and using our equipment. They're just able to really narrow down a wavelength a little bit better than like a colorimeter, and get a lot more accuracy and precision between measurements the way we do it. So we use the spec for things like nitrites, nitrates, phosphates, ammonia, and then we also use what are called like multi-parameter meters or SONs for a lot of our physical measurements that we take. So we use ones that are used for ocean monitoring. They're kind of some beefy looking SONs that we will take and put into our exhibits, and get measurements on things like dissolved oxygen, pH, the conductivity, which can be converted to salinity pretty easily, on our systems that we do spot checks on. We also have probes that are built, in situ into our system, so we can get that data instantly. It goes to a big control system. We can get alarms that are sent to everyone's cell phone if something is off, and so we have kind of both of those sorts of things. We also have other like specialty equipment, like our HPLC, which is a high performance liquid chromatograph, and we use that to measure concentrations of medications that are added to our systems. So if you're dosing something like praziquantel into a system, you wonder, are we still at our target dose? We can test that on that instrument, which is really convenient and cool to have. A lot of people just have to guess and hope that they did their math right, but we can double check, which is really awesome to be able to do.
Now, out of curiosity, just, like how different places do stuff. Now, you like the nitrite, ammonia and stuff. Do you do those every single day, or do you have like a set schedule for when you test things?
Yeah, we have a set schedule. Not every single day. Being an open aquarium, we have a little more flexibility than at a closed aquarium where those things might be building up at faster rates. Things like those nitrogen products, because we replace water at a faster rate, they don't really build up to the same levels as you would see at a closed system. So some of that we can kind of just keep a little bit of a looser eye on and not have to test every single day what's kind of building up. And, we have around 350 different what we call enclosures, which is different places where animals could be kept. And our team, we've got a decent sized water team, but that's a lot of testing. If you were ever going to test all of those, you definitely could not do it all in one day, right? No. You can't really do it all in 1 week either if you're using good methods. So we have to be smart about what we test, and understanding, okay, all these systems are getting this same makeup water from this location. Let's test the makeup water and maybe some of the more critical those tanks, and kind of have an understanding of what's going on and everything, and be kind of just thoughtful on which things we test and when, and make sure that we're not just getting quantity, but quality as well, as far as the way we're doing things, because it would be a scramble to be testing that many systems. You just couldn't do it.
I can't even imagine 50 systems.
Yeah, it's a lot. I looked it up to see how many different individual enclosures, and they're not all different systems because of the way our water flows. Everyone's not self-contained in its own thing, which helps, but you just couldn't do that much, And once a week is fine for water chemistry on well-established systems. You only really need to go and test them every day or more often if there's a problem.
Okay, so you mentioned that obviously you're connected to seawater. What are some of the most interesting things that you've come across? I feel kind of like, the upwelling events are pretty interesting themselves, but is there anything beyond that you just, that's pretty neat?
Well, one of the things I've really liked doing that I never did before in previous jobs, my background was in chemistry. That's what I studied in college, and worked at a lab, and eventually worked at an aquarium lab, at a closed system aquarium. But what's been really fascinating to me working at the Monterey Bay Aquarium is looking at phytoplankton that comes in. So since we have that raw seawater coming in at night, we introduce all of that phytoplankton, which are basically microscopic marine algae that come in, and just looking at them under the microscope, seeing who's in the water, not just like the chemicals and the ions in the water, has been really fun to me. So we put those onto a counting chamber, look at it under our microscope, and see all of the different kinds of animals that are in just a drop of water. There are so many different kinds of animals in there. I think the most excited that we got was when we found this adorable marine tardigrade, in the water, which was really cute. He's just swimming around and kind of munching on some debris, We're like, "Whoa, who are you? You're really cute. Are you a tardigrade?" So just seeing some of those cute little critters that you would never know are in there. You think about the animals in the aquarium being, fish and other things, but we'll see some little zooplankton zooming about in our water samples that we look for. And just in general, phytoplankton are beautiful. They come in all kinds of different shapes and sizes. Some of them, they're what you call dinoflagellates. They have little flagella that they move around and cruise about. And then you have these other ones that are diatoms that are more geometric looking. I have a fun time trying to just learn all of their names, which there are so many different types. But mostly I just say, oh, that's that one that looks like a candy corn, and I have to look at my guide and remember which one it is. Oh, that's the one that looks like a little leaf. Oh, okay, that's Prorocentrum micans, So you kind of get used to it. But for me, it's so fun to just look at all of the diversity of those and what's really living in the water. Is fascinating to see. You don't see that at a closed system aquarium. You have that filtration. You don't have that much life in the water, and it's really cool to see.
That sounds incredible. You mentioned that it's a semi-open, semi-closed system. I guess this is a dual part question. What are some of the challenges of that?
Some of the challenges are whatever's happening in the bay also can happen in the aquarium. We can, turn off that raw seawater if something is going on, filter the water instead. But we also have things where, sometimes our pipes will have animals and things decide to try to take up residence inside them.
Like on the bottom of the boat, you gotta scrape stuff off.
Exactly. So and unlike at the bottom of a boat, you can't really paint it with copper and have everything do well. So we have to do more natural ways of kind of removing some of that crusty growth that you'll get on things in our pipes. So we use these things we call them pigs. They're about the same diameter as the pipes that they're meant to go through. And they kind of almost remind me of like, I don't know, like a little marine flotation device like you would have on the side of your boat to make sure it doesn't get hit by a dock or something. They're just kind of these cylindrical items with a kind of a flared tip. But we'll run those through the water or through the pipes, and they go along and they kind of clean off everything and scrape them clean every so often, so we can keep getting good flow. Because if you don't try to clean your pipes every so often, you're going to start getting decreased flow, and that could throw off the way our system is designed. So you have to keep everything working and clean and getting that best quality water through.
That's fascinating. I would not have thought of that, but I guess, even in home aquariums, we do have buildup in our tanks, in the pipes, and you're supposed to take your stuff apart and clean it every so often. So same sort of concept, just again on a much larger scale.
Much bigger scale, yeah.
What's the difference between an open system versus a closed system?
Yeah, so I'll start with the closed system because it's what everyone kind of knows more so. You have a tank. There's not really water going in and out. Maybe, every so many weeks you decide to do like a water change. So you take some of that old water out and put new water in. But you have things like your nitrogen products that start to build up. You see nitrate creeping up over time. And that's pretty much when you decide at home, oh, maybe I should do a water change on this exhibit and, empty out some and mix some new water up and put it in. And that's on a bigger scale with a lot of other aquariums. That's what they're basically like. They have the same water. They recirculate it for a very long period of time. They do add new water and remove some water, but it's basically the same water. And, aquariums have gotten pretty smart with their engineering as far as creating like denitrification systems that take some of that nitrate out and reduce it to nitrogen gas. But, in an open system, you have more exchange of water because you're pumping in water from another source. And as you're pumping new water in, you're also removing some of that old water. So it's more of a constant flow of fresh makeup or fresh water coming in that is replacing that. So you don't get the buildup of things like nitrate to the same level. You're getting in new water more constantly. And, even though we call ourselves sometimes an open system, it's more semi-open because there is more recirculating within. Even though water comes in, we have it run through our exhibits. We treat it before it goes out into the bay just to make sure that there aren't any hitchhikers or other things that could be coming out. And exotic species is what we call it. Make sure that there's not animals making their way out like eggs, not like actual fish getting out, but like something's eggs got out, and if they hatched, it could cause some problems for our native ecosystem. So we have ways that we treat it to make sure that doesn't happen. But it's more of just that kind of that constant input and export, the frequency of that water exchange.
Interesting. I'm glad you said that about how you have to treat the water before it goes out for like invasive species. And I know because I've taken care of jellyfish in the past, and I've only done moon jellies, but I know you can be very, like if you have multiple jellies systems, which I think you guys do, you guys are pioneers as far as jellyfish keeping goes, but like it doesn't take much. Like jellyfish are like, you probably don't even see jellyfish like in their like planula stage going through. So it would be incredibly easy. Even if it's not visible, it's probably still there in the water. You don't want to have a smack of jelly in the in the bowl.
Yeah, yeah, and we're regulated on that, so we have to provide data showing that we have efficient UVs that reduce this, and our processes are good. So we definitely make sure we're doing our part to keep any of these exotic or invasive, potentially invasive species out of the bay.
I do have two questions from some of my followers. The first one is from Kelly, who says, hi. She wants to know, how does managing water quality vary in a closed versus an open system?
It does vary a lot. It's been interesting to see. In a closed system, you kind of live and die by your water quality numbers. You see, ammonia went up by 0.03. So you're already thinking of how to remedy that action, right? In an open system, you go, well, okay, went up slightly. Oh, okay, yeah, we got an upwelling going on. Let's just wait a while and see. Okay, yeah, it's a little bit more normal. So you kind of rely on Mother Nature taking her course a little bit more in that respect than you do at a closed system aquarium where you're instantly tweaking settings. But there are other kinds of things, as far as like not just thinking about nitrogen cycling, but you definitely pay more attention to more of like the dissolved gases at our aquarium than I feel like you do usually at a closed aquarium, because we do get that low dissolved oxygen water coming in, and then sometimes we're heating or cooling it. You can get more of dissolved gas changes. So you do pay more attention to those as opposed to really worrying about those nitrates creeping up. So it's just different things that you're paying more attention to. Whereas, in a closed system, your gas pressure pretty much stays the same because the system is always kind of running at the same temperature, always got the same kind of de-aeration going on. But we see more changes in that than you do in a closed system. So those are, I think, the things that have really struck me as being different. Some of what I'm looking for and watching the trends on. It's just a little bit different.
That's interesting. I wouldn't have thought about the dissolved gases, but that totally makes sense. Okay, so our last question is from Chris. He wants to know, what contaminants are you finding in the water? Does the collection depth affect the parameters?
So contaminants is kind of a tricky word, right? Oh, well, what are we considering a contaminant? I always think of something that's like man-made as far as contamination. So the Monterey Bay Aquarium is next to the Salinas Valley, which, if you know too much about, like, I don't know, your Steinbeck novel history, that's what he called, I think, America's Salad Bowl, where most of the salad for the United States is actually grown. Huge amounts of farmland there that provide a lot of food to the nation. So we do have really strict rules about, what the farmers can kind of put into the groundwater and all of that. But, typically in agricultural areas, you can see higher nitrates and phosphates as a result of some of the fertilizers that are used. We don't see elevated nitrate and phosphate results in our water. I think that's partly because of some of those mitigations that they're doing, but also our intake is about 55 feet deep. So we're pulling also that deep sea water, and we're not really getting anything that's coming from offshore as far as that goes. Sometimes you get elevated levels of like E. coli that they have to close a beach nearby. In those cases, I do pay attention to if there are sewage spills or anything like that might happen. But in general, we don't really see any contaminants. We're also not really looking for them, though. I'm not testing for pesticides in the water. That's one more thing that would be just not really useful to us to do, and it would be very difficult to test. And, from what we can tell, it's not really having the effect. Our animals are healthy. So it's not something we're going to invest a lot of energy in. Things like heavy metals, like arsenic or lead contamination, we've not really seen anything like that either in our testing, although we are going to be using an ICP OES pretty soon, which will let us test for those, among other things, which those instruments are really cool. You can do a whole suite of trace metals. So we'll start seeing those, but I don't anticipate we'll see anything out of the ordinary with those. It's more to just kind of keep an eye on some of the other trace elements that are maybe a little more plentiful in our water, instead of things like lead. We're just not going to see much of that. So yeah, I guess contaminants gets a little bit tricky with that because we're not particularly looking for them, but we also haven't seen any indication that there are them when we have sent samples out. So I think we're just very fortunate that we live where we have some really great water that we can use. We're not in a busy city or in a port. Sometimes big ports, you get more concentration of things like copper and zinc because of that paint that they use on ships. But we haven't really encountered much of that. So we're very fortunate, I guess.
That's lucky. I'm actually kind of surprised at your answer, and I don't know. Well, I don't know if I want to get into this or if we're allowed to talk about this, but plastic pollution, I don't know. I guess I just kind of would assumed that, there accidentally would have been some like microplastics or nanoplastics being pulled in with some of the water, but maybe, if it is coming from so deep that, it's not highly concentrated there yet.
Well, and we've done some research through the aquarium and through Monterey that have shown microplastics are in the deepest parts of the ocean. Any plastics that were in that really small, fine amount would come in because we do bring in raw seawater. But I think it's just still such at low concentrations that we haven't noticed any effect. So it's not to say that couldn't become more of a problem one day, and it's a big reason we're watching for things, kind of monitoring not just what we can test with our water chemistry, but physically looking at things, getting a variety, doing research as an institution and partnering with others to see what's happening in the oceans, because that will affect us in the long run, what's happening out in the bay.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
All interconnected.
Very much so. And I feel like here more than anywhere else, that I've worked, I feel so connected to the ocean here. It's wonderful.
It's such a very unique, just awesome system and place.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is my very last final question. If people want to donate to the aquarium or want to get involved or participate, because there's so much right now that's virtual, what can they do? How do they go about that?
If you visit our website, we have links on our website to areas where you can donate and click to donate. If you are not in a position to donate, I've been told that just even liking our YouTube account helps us out. So you can go ahead and find us on social media, find us on YouTube. We even have a Twitch channel that you can go, and sometimes our social media team is playing games like Animal Crossing. They did some of that and built an aquarium. It's adorable. But there's lots of ways that you can, support us virtually with watching some of that content. We also have our webcams that are showing a lot of different videos. People can watch those. I believe that there should be links to donate as well while watching those. They even do one in the mornings called Meditation, where you go through some mindfulness while watching the jellies. And it's a good way to kind of calm down and relax and start your day. So I've even started some of the mindfulness, and it's just a different way of looking at things and kind of living in the moment, which is really kind of a neat way to deal with stress. We also have our online gift store. We've had some really cool items come through recently. Things that our president has drawn, these beautiful drawings of different sea creatures. You can get them on a mask, on a scarf. They even have this really silly looking sea otter mask that looks like a little sea otter face. And it is hilarious. So my boss bought that and walked in wearing it, and it was just the most hilarious thing to see her looking like a sea otter. It was adorable. So there's a lot of cute things that they've come out with, to try to get people still thinking about the aquarium, even if they can't physically visit. We've really had a lot of people join us virtually, which has been great to reach maybe people we might not have reached before, who are looking for that kind of content. But plenty of ways to donate. Just go to our website and just type in Google Monterey Bay Aquarium, and you'll find our website really easily.
All right. Well, thank you again so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me. Like I said, I'll have links below. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. I'll monitor them. And if you do have questions for Karen, I'll be happy to send them along your way.
Sounds good. All right. Thank you so much for having me. It was fun to chat with you, and hopefully everyone out there had a good time.
Great. See you next time.